Golden rule number 1, avoid unnecessary details. You know that what you say always interests me? That's because we're such good comrades. Not altogether. I think it's because you never dwell upon details. Then one is interesting in conversation according as one omits details, unnecessary details. I remember once when visiting friends I hadn't seen in years, my hostess said to me, "Ever since your arrival, I've been trying to discover why you're so interesting in conversation, and I've decided it's because you omit unnecessary details." I felt she had paid me a high compliment. Yes, but one that you deserved. Even in telling this instinct, you were direct. A bore would have rambled several years ago, 4 years ago, just this last June. No, it was only 3 years ago, because I remember now that 4 years ago I did not attend the alumni reunion of our college, so it must have been 3 years ago. And then I was the guest of a classmate. She had not been attending reunions, so I had not seen her for 5 years, at least. Almost every year I attend the alumni reunion. On this occasion, I was staying with someone from my class. Pardon my interruption, but you are a success as a bore. No, as an imitator. I think you should have been an actress. Yes. I think nature intended me for the stage. I could have acted. In fact, I often find it difficult not to act. That is, I find it hard to be myself. Like Tommy in Sensation and Tommy in Resolve? Yes. And you ask why I was not an actress? It was not because I didn't know I had the talent. From an upset reason, I had so many talents that, like the woman in Mother Goose, I hardly knew what to do. That sounds modest. You probably would have been a great actress. I might not have been. Sometimes, you know, people who are very gifted seem to miss the best that life has to offer. I've decided that you're interesting not simply because you avoid being sidetracked, but because you have such a stupendous amount of conceit. You seem quite aware of what you possess. It's delightful, your talent and your conceit both. I'm sure that if anyone else possessed my talents, I shouldn't hesitate to speak of them. Why should I not speak of mine? That's certainly one way to look at it. Now, I suppose if I were to tell you that you're very gifted, you would say thank you. I think I am too, or words to that effect. Why shouldn't I recognize my gifts and be thankful for them? Well, usually, you know, when anyone receives a compliment, it is either regarded as flattery and dismissed, or if they do think the praise is merited, their words are expected to deny it anyway. Yes, but that's just insincerity. And besides, we're a long way from our subject. We were wondering why. Why some people bore and why others don't. We decided that under no circumstances should one enter into too many details. They're ruinous. If a person is very polite, they may pretend interest they do not feel, but often they're betrayed by an absent expression, the giveaway that the details have done their deadly work. You always seem interested, though, even when the speaker wanders far from the main road into a dozen tangled little bypaths. I appear interested because I am interested. I'm continually on alert, watching to see how they'll get back to the main road. And, in the majority of cases, they never do. I shall try to remember the rule and profit by its significance. He is lost in such a labyrinth that, compared with it, the Garden of Versailles and the maze of Hampton Court are nothing. And just as those world-famed networks have a kind of attraction for the curious, so I find it interesting to follow the bore as he moves from one intricate passage into another, striving to find an exit. But I must leave him to his fate, or I too shall be lost in a maze and unable to find the main path. Golden rule number 2, do not ask question number 2 until number 1 has been answered. Since I last visited you, I've been paying closer attention to the conversational faults of my friends. I've concluded that one of the most glaring is to ask questions and then not wait for the answers. I have one friend in particular who, whenever he meets me, inquires in the most solicitous way about my family, my health, and various affairs, and then, before I have the chance to respond, proceeds to tell me all about himself, his family, his bills, and everything else besides. I know this species very well, you say, and I have classified my friends accordingly, based on their merits as listeners. And where have you placed me? At the head of the list as the greatest offender? Or perhaps the least? The least. You always wait until I answer one question before asking another. Thank you. Do I ask many questions? Yes, too many. But perhaps you've noticed that just as some people ask too many questions, there are others who ask too few. I must say I never thought of that. To ask many questions often indicates an undue amount of curiosity and puts the question party in a rather tight spot. To ask too few shows a lack of interest. The reason some people are so very prosaic and uninteresting is that they are entirely absorbed in themselves. In consequence, they ask few or no questions at all, showing that they are not in the least concerned in the lives or thoughts of their friends. There is a happy mean where one shows neither undue curiosity nor cold disinterest. Asking questions, after all, can sometimes stir up a hornet's nest, so to speak. One's friend may respond with such fervor that we're left wishing we had shown less interest. That is why it is so necessary to remember the golden rule we spoke of in our last conversation, namely, avoid unnecessary details. Yes, you said, and as I've already told you, that's why you are always interesting. You never bore one with long stories. I usually try to treat all my friends as though each one wore a little tag marked, "This is my busy day. Make it short." Or perhaps, if you have any time to kill your own. What a rapid pace we live at nowadays. People rush. On the contrary, the peasant class is never in a hurry. They talk slowly, eat slowly, work at the same lagged pace. In other words, they exist, but they do not live. They do not enjoy what we enjoy. A daily feast is spread before them, but they do not partake of it. What do they know of glowing sunsets? Of moonlit waves? Of shaded walks through hushed woods? Of narrow streams winding their way beneath leaning trees? To the peasant, the sunset tells only what tomorrow's weather holds for the crops, the velvet stretch through which the stream winds, merely green pasture for his flock. I've gotten away from my subject. Like the boar, I have sidetracked. Only what you say does not bore, you reply. You mean, what you say does not bore. Nor you, nor anyone else. Thank you. I should thank you instead. Now I am to remember first that golden rule number 1 is avoid unnecessary details. Golden rule number 2, do not ask question number 2 until question number 1 has been answered. And furthermore, one must be neither too curious nor too indifferent. That is, one must not ask too few questions, nor too many just enough. I fear I shall find it difficult to observe this rule, but I shall try to acquire the tact that is necessary. May I practice the art on you? That will be charming, and you may begin at once. Golden rule number 3, do not interrupt another while he is speaking. So we agree that one of the greatest conversational faults is to ask questions, and then, without waiting for the answers, to plunge at once into a detailed account of one's own affairs. I've discovered another common failing, and one I fear that I myself possess. Asking after the welfare of a friend or their family, and then, just as they are beginning to respond, interrupting with some entirely irrelevant remark. I'm sure you haven't that fault, you say, although it is a very common one.
It's based, I think, on the principle that people are, as a rule, vitally concerned only with what concerns themselves. I have a friend who insists that no one really enjoys listening to what another has to say. He believes that the interested listener is interested only in having the other person finish, so that he may have his turn to speak.
Still, I've noticed that most people prefer to recite their woes, not their joys. But of course, that depends on the individual. Some people always have a hard luck story. Others dwell upon the brighter happenings in their lives. I think we can each recall one friend whose greatest pleasure is to pose as a martyr, and another who, no matter his actual troubles, always finds something to share about his supposed good fortune, real or imagined. Speaking of faults, I think the best way to correct them is to notice them in our friends, and then try to avoid them ourselves. But of course, you say lightly, you haven't any faults. Not any friends either, I suppose. I fear you are not a very good critic. I may not be, but you certainly exhibit none of the bad habits you've enumerated. Oh, you couldn't see them even if I had, from sheer stupidity. Hardly? It's only that, as far as I'm concerned, you have become to me as Maisie was to Dick in The Light That Failed. The Queen can do no wrong. That reminds me, I've just finished reading The Light That Failed, and I'm sure I shall never forget the awfulness of it. The awfulness of having the light go out forever. Kipling makes one feel it so vividly when he writes, "I shan't," the voice rose in a wail. "My God, I'm blind, and the darkness will never go away." He made as if to leap from the bed, but Torpenhow's arms were around him, and Dick's chin was on his friend's shoulder. His breath was squeezed out of him, and he could only gasp, "Blind." And again there's that haunting picture Kipling draws of a blind man who suddenly finds himself unable to do what he's always done. I brought the book with me. Listen to this. A wise man who was blind will keep his eyes on the floor and sit still. For amusement, he may pick coal lumps out of a scuttle with the tongs and pile them near the fender, keeping count of the lumps, which must all be put back again, one by one, very carefully. He may set himself sums if he cares to work them out. He may talk to himself, or to the cat, if she chooses to visit him. And if his trade has been that of an artist, he may sketch in the air with his forefinger. But that is too much like drawing a pig with his eyes shut. He may go to his bookshelves and count his books, arranging them by size, or go to his wardrobe and count out his shirts, laying them in piles of 2 or 3 on the bed, as they suffer from frayed cuffs or lost buttons. Even these amusements tire in time, and all the time is very, very long. I suppose this portrayal is true to life. Undoubtedly, in a way, I said. But I had a novel experience while traveling east recently. While on the train, I saw a gentleman trying to engage a little boy, who didn't respond to his attempts. I heard him ask the child whether he was a little boy and how old he was. I saw then that the gentleman was blind, and thinking that he might prefer to talk with me, I introduced myself. I found him to be a most delightful conversationalist. He told me that he had gone blind very suddenly 5 years ago, but that his work hadn't been interrupted for even a day since. His position as manager of a large corporation required him to travel frequently by train, but he had continued his journeys as before, sometimes with a secretary, and sometimes alone. He was alone when I met him. He was remarkably cheerful and entertaining, and at the same time well informed on current topics of interest. It seemed almost impossible to believe that he was blind. His case was extraordinary, but of course he was not an artist as poor Dick was before the light went out. I've just discovered another reason why you're so very interesting. It's because you always have some unusual experience to recount. Yes, but you know we had decided that people generally don't care to hear others talk. Well, I'm going to retract that decision. I've concluded that we usually do like to hear others talk if they have something interesting to say.
We're all children in a sense. Tell us a good story and we'll listen, provided the storyteller knows how to tell it. Do you know what I've been thinking about while you were telling me this? And that we have gotten quite far from the original subject. I was just thinking how much you said in comparatively few words. If someone were telling this incident, they would certainly be conforming to golden rule number 1, avoid unnecessary details. And you conform to all the rules we have learned so far. Oh, thank you. My 3 golden rules are: rule number 1, avoid unnecessary details. Rule number 2, do not ask question number 2 until question number 1 has been answered. Also, be neither too curious nor too disinterested. That is, do not ask too few or too many questions, but just enough. And our new rule, golden rule number 3, do not interrupt another while he is speaking. How frequently this rule is broken. Many persons, even those ordinarily well-bred, have the very bad habit of interrupting others. But I deserve no credit for observing golden rule number 3, for you never, Tarzan. No, I try telling a long story. No, I don't do that. I once knew a gentleman who used to say to his niece, who was rather long-winded, "Oh, Allah, you tell such a long story, make it short." And so I always try to make my story short. Golden rule number 4, do not contradict another, especially when the subject under discussion is of trivial importance. We always seem to drift back to our favorite topic, how not to bore. At least we discuss it so frequently that I assume we are mutually interested. I'll show you that I am very much interested in everything that helps me make myself more pleasing to my friends. If you would not regard my compliments so dubiously, I should say that would be impossible. Another case of the infallibility of the Queen. But to go back, I often wonder whether this pleasure we take in receiving the approval of others is not virtually the root of all good. It is certainly most fortunate that we care for the good opinion of our fellow beings, especially when we strive to merit it somehow. We never seem to outgrow a childish love for rewards. I suppose that if the truth were told, much of what we think we do for the sake of culture is really done for the sake of Dame Grundy. Of course, I do not mean this as applied to self-glorification, but rather to our higher aims and purposes. Most of us, for example, think that we make great efforts at self-improvement solely for the satisfaction that those efforts give us. But I wonder how steadfastly one would work at his chosen calling if one were on a desert island, remote from all the hearts of men. Let's return to our subject. You say your latest discovery is that even grown persons contradict one another. I thought that only children had this fault. So did I, but my attention was called to this a few days ago while visiting my sister. While she was telling me something of great interest to us both, her little daughter contradicted her several times in the course of our conversation. Partly because I was annoyed, and partly because I wished to teach the child a lesson, I said to my sister, "Have you ever noticed how frequently children contradict their elders? It is certainly one of the greatest faults a child can have." "Yes," she answered, "but many grown persons have the same fault." When I expressed surprise, she added, "If you are inclined to doubt the truth of this assertion, just try telling something you've heard to others who are familiar with the story, and you will soon see that this fault is not confined to children.
And then I discovered this fault not only in others, but also in myself. Oh dear, maybe I am guilty of the same offense. I'm sure you never contradict anyone in the way I mean. It is certainly very embarrassing to make a statement and then have it contradicted, even when the matter is of little consequence. How many rules have we learned so far? Golden rule number 1 is avoid unnecessary details. Rule number 2, do not ask question number 2 until question number 1 has been answered. Do not be too curious nor too disinterested. That is, do not ask too many questions nor too few, just enough. Rule number 3, do not interrupt another while he is speaking. And the new rule, golden rule number 4, do not contradict another, especially when the subject under discussion is of trivial importance. So if Mrs. One Stretcher tells us that Mrs. De Waters has crossed the ocean 12 times in as many years, we are not to say, but she's only gone abroad once every 2 years, which makes just 12 times. The person who contradicts frequently restates the matter merely in another way. We hope you liked our video. Today, we have shared the first 4 rules. The next 4 rules will be uploaded tomorrow. We have written a total of 12 rules and will be uploading them in sets of 4.
So for today, the first 4 rules are done. Rules 5, 6, 7, and 8 will be shared tomorrow, and then rules 9, 10, 11, and 12 will follow after that.